Okay, so what happens when you take a bunch of YouTubers and just drop them on a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? Well, you get an insane story of willpower, crazy ingenuity, and a desperate fight against Mother Nature. Their only shot at getting out, they had to build a boat from scratch and sail it across miles of open water. This is that story, the story of their impossible escape.
And that was the mantra. Seriously. This wasn't some exaggeration for the camera, it was the cold, hard reality of what they were up against. Before we even get into how they did it, just let that sink in for a second. This was not a game. It was a genuine, high-stakes fight for survival.
So here's the basic setup. Mr. Beast and his friends are stranded on an island. The goal seems simple enough. See that other island on the horizon? Get there. But the catch, oh, it's a big one. They have to build their own sailboat to make the journey.
Right? This is the million-dollar question. It's the one thing that separates a really daring adventure from, a complete disaster. You'd think for a challenge this intense, you'd need at least some experience.
And the answer? A hard no. Not a single one of them had ever sailed before. And that one little word just changes everything. The stakes go from difficult to, this is basically impossible. They were walking into one of nature's toughest arenas, totally blind. But before they could even think about building a boat, they had a much bigger problem, the island itself. See, this wasn't just about escaping. It was about surviving an environment that was, frankly, trying to break them.
And what an environment it was. I mean, the jungle was filled with some seriously nasty creatures. We're talking fertile ant snakes, yellow eyelash vipers, even the wandering banana spider. And if that wasn't enough, they were dealing with crushing heat, a constant threat of dehydration, and a water supply that was disappearing fast.
These dangers weren't just some abstract threat, it was constant physical misery. Nolan said he had over 60 bug bites just on his arms and hands. 60! That really gives you a sense of the daily torment they were going through. The island was just wearing them down, one bite at a time.
So, how in the world do you build a boat when you have absolutely nothing? You scavenge. And in a pretty wild twist, their most valuable materials came from garbage that had washed up on the shore. We're talking plastic barrels, old ropes, and random scraps of wood. Their entire vessel of hope was literally built from other people's trash. So, with their pile of materials gathered, the real work started. This was the Great Build, a huge, back-breaking effort to turn a bunch of scavenged junk into something that could actually take on the ocean.
And the whole process was just brutal. I mean, they were making these dangerous treks into the jungle to find bamboo, lashing together this giant frame in the blazing sun, and they even had a failed attempt to melt down plastic to make oars. Every single step was a fight against their own inexperience and the unforgiving heat.
And then came the turning point. After days of absolutely grueling work, they dragged the basic frame into the water for a float test. And it actually worked. It floated. And in that moment, for the first time, you could see that hope was real. The impossible suddenly started to feel, well, possible. With the boat finally finished, the last great challenge began. The supreme ordeal, an epic, nearly 12-hour journey across the open sea that pushed their bodies and their little trash boat to the absolute limit. Their path took them straight through this incredibly treacherous channel. And the problem here was the currents. They were so powerful, they could have just dragged the raft completely off course and out into the massive, empty Pacific Ocean. Getting through this channel was everything.
7 straight hours. That's how long they paddled, non-stop. They were fighting seasickness, total exhaustion, dehydration, and that was before they even got to the hardest part of the trip. The amount of endurance that took is just staggering to think about.
Yeah, this was not some heroic sailing movie. This was the raw, ugly reality. The crew was physically just falling apart. Their bodies were giving up, and the endless motion of the ocean was taking a serious toll. This is what it really looks like when your ambition slams into its physical limits.
Then, after hours of what felt like pure misery, a miracle happened. The tide shifted, and suddenly they were being pushed towards the island. They were on the home stretch. Victory was so close, they could practically taste it. This was it, the final 5% of their journey. And then, absolute heartbreak. They were just half a mile from shore. I mean, close enough to swim for it. But right there, in that final stretch, the tide turned on them. All of that forward momentum they had, gone. They actually started drifting backwards, away from their goal. And you can just feel the devastation in that moment. After everything they had endured, to get so agonizingly close, and then to have victory just snatched away at the last possible second. The disbelief, the feeling of defeat, it was just crushing.
In the end, nature was just too strong. After almost 12 hours of non-stop, brutal effort, watching the island they fought so hard for just slip away, they had no choice. They had to fire their emergency flare and admit that they had failed.
But, the story doesn't really end with defeat. It ends with a promise from Mr. Beast. The pain of that loss wasn't just an ending, it was fuel. It's this incredible lesson in resilience, and it shows that sometimes the biggest wins aren't about reaching the finish line, but about what you learn from the failure. It kind of makes you wonder, if you push yourself to your absolute limit and still come up short, is that really a failure at all?